folks, welcome to my first video. This is the installation of the Groovy Boonedox Landing Gear standard kit on a 2019 Hobie Outback. Let's jump in. So first step, let's make sure everything's in the box. In the box you'll find your knuckles, your wheels, stainless steel backing plates, your nylon gussets, your wheel locks, the HDPE reinforcers, your wheel arms, the crossbar, and some hardware. This is all really well packed. Boonedox does a great job with that. So now that we've made sure everything is there, let's move on to the next step. Hey everybody, wanted to introduce you to the installation of our Boonedox Groovy Landing Gear. You can see the product itself and the product itself fully mounted on the boat. Wanted to give you just kind of a brief overview of the tools you'll need to do the installation. So let me take you briefly through that and then we can go from there. Quick note, you will need a Dremel type tool to shape your HDPE reinforcer. So any kind of Dremel tool with a rotary sanding drum will do just fine. Okay, so what tools do I need to install the Groovy Boonedox Landing Gear? As I said, the very first and one of the most important tools that you'll have is everything in the box. The Boonedox folks don't give you any tools with which to install it, but they do pack everything exceptionally well. Do save your box. We're gonna use the flap on this box here in a minute. You will need a knife to cut out your cardboard, cut your flap off and trim your template. You will need a jigsaw. The reason you'll need a jigsaw is that you'll have to cut your HDPE reinforcers. And HDPE is a fancy name for a plastic. It looks like a big commercial white plastic cutting board. It's about maybe 6 by 8 inches. This is what the shavings from something like that looks like. So you're gonna build your template. I recommend a vise to stick your HDPE in so that you can hold it firmly while you cut it. You will need 2 hex wrenches, one 3/16 for the main bolts that drop into your boat, and the other a 5/32, and the 5/32 is for the smaller bolts here, okay? So those are the only 2 hex wrenches you'll need. You will need a drill, you will need drill bits. The other thing that you're gonna need, and this is, you can kind of go either way with this. I experimented both ways. In order to thread the backing plate, to get the backing plate and HDPE reinforcer back up to where the holes are, you've got to thread some kind of thread down into the boat. The Boonedox folks, when I talked to them, recommended picture wire because it's sort of, you can push it and control it from the back end a little bit more easily. I have found, however, that braid works better. And I chose to use a yellow braid and a green braid, and you're gonna see why in here in just a minute. But that's really it. That's the extent of the tools that you'll need. And all this stuff is pretty well necessary in order to get this installed the right way. So there's an introduction to what we need. Let me introduce you to the process of evaluating your boat, making some decisions about things. But the very first thing you're gonna do after you unpack your box, make sure everything is present, the very first thing you're gonna do is mount these gussets to the knuckle, okay? And you can do that with these screws. These take the lock nuts that are in there. I happen to have stainless steel washers on there right now. But the lock nuts go here, the washers go down here. You're not gonna put anything down here for the moment, but you are gonna install this gusset onto this knuckle, this gusset onto this knuckle. You are gonna do the same thing on the other side. And you're also gonna put your knuckles and your crossbar, and this is the crossbar. This is a 2019 Outback, as I mentioned. The crossbar that comes with this boat is a lot longer than you'll need for this installation. So obviously you're gonna cut pieces off of it. I'll prove it to you. Here's a piece. One of the pieces that we cut off. Now this isn't all you're going to cut off. As I said, I put this together incorrectly the first time. So at any rate, you're going to, the first step is to mount the gussets to the knuckle. The second step is to kind of lay this out and decide, okay, I think I want it to be roughly here with the knuckle, and the other knuckle, you kind of place that roughly where you think you want it to be. And then you take your rail here and you slide it in. By the way, there's a left and a right knuckle. I didn't know that. I didn't think it through. And remember that you need to have space for your wheels to kind of fit in here, right? So there's a gap like this between the end of this thing and where the bar begins. Underneath this thing, you'll flip it over. There are spaces for 2 set screws. So you will put it together, put your set screw in there, your outside set screw, mark that, and then make your cut from there. And I'll show you that in just a minute. But so basically, the first step is you're going to lay this out, and you're going to slide your bar in, and you're going to kind of play with where you want the placement. And then once you're happy with it, you'll then make sure your bar is roughly even. You'll on either side, because there'll be a little bit sticking out here, there'll be a little bit sticking out over there. You'll flip these over. You put the set screws in, and then you'll measure a 1/2 inch from the set screw is roughly right about here. You're going to measure 1/2 inch from that set screw, and that's where you're going to make your cut on the bar itself. And you're going to do the same on the other side, and that's going to give you your appropriate bar length. The next step after you get it cut to the right proportion is you assemble this whole assembly. Put this whole thing together, and it's just a matter of sliding that bar back in here, tightening down both set screws, and you're pretty much done. The hardest part of kind of mechanical assembly is over, right? So you now have this whole assembly that you can pick up and kind of move around and use to kind of place, okay, yeah, that's exactly where I want it, and I can mark my hole there, and I can mark my hole there. Same on the other side. You're also going to do that with your HDPE backing plate, and I'll show you that in just a minute, and your stainless steel backing plate. So that way you'll know that all the holes are in the right place and they're going to go straight down. One lesson I did learn, and I say it several times in the video, you're going to think, oh, I just want to drill a hole just big enough for this bolt to drop through. It's a nice idea, but I strongly recommend that you drill it bigger, because it's going to make the final step in the assembly much easier if the hole in your boat is a little bit bigger and the hole in the HDPE is a little bit bigger. So we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But once you lay that out, you'll mark your holes, you'll drill, and then you can, but let's talk about fabrication. Okay, so let's say you've not installed a thing, you've just got your Groovy landing gear, you're excited, you've got the box home, you've got it here, you open it up and you make sure everything's there and everything's cool. And then you go to your boat and you say, okay, well, where am I gonna put this thing? The traditional mounting location, of course, if you got the Outback kit, there's an 8-inch rod that you would use to install out here in this location, backing rod. You would mark your locations, 1, 2 holes, you'd mark them, you'd drill, you would drop some wire down there, you go to your back hatch, open that up, put your backing rod on there, pull that wire back through with the backing rod on there. We're going to use the same process. We're just going to use a different mounting location. So the first step that you've got to decide is which mounting location do you want. If you buy the standard kit, you've kind of committed to using this flat area in here, okay? The advantage to this area is that the outside of the gunnel in the 2019 model, a little bit thinner than it used to be. And so Boonedox is giving an alternative of mounting to the flat side here, because it gives you the opportunity
to use the HDPE reinforcer to build an HDPE reinforcement platform that sits flush up against the bottom of the boat, okay, and is shaped sort of this way, goes along here and comes out this way. So you've essentially spread the load from one sort of backing plate that would, you know, kind of run along here. You've spread the load all the way out this way. And so it makes sense. It doesn't put as much stress on, you don't have hot spots, if you will, in terms of the upward force pressure. So that's what I chose to do. Your first step is kind of to laying this out. I highly recommend you put your seat on. I'll show you that in the video. So put your seat on, you know, clip it in, make sure that when you choose your location, because this can go anywhere. I mean, you could slide this up this way, you could slide it back a little bit if you wanted to. I chose this location because it allowed me to centrally locate the holes in the HDPE backing plate assembly. So I spread the load hopefully as efficiently as I could along that HDPE backing plate. So the first step is to determine sort of where this is going to be. And that's why your first step is to put the knuckle assembly and rod together. Once you do that, you kind of get a sense, okay, that's where I want it. Take this off, put it aside. Then you have this blank space here, and that's where the next step is going to come into play. Let me show you. Okay, so because I'm a big believer in not wasting anything, here's a cardboard box. Let's allow it to help us a little bit. So now we have basically what amounts to a white piece of cardboard, and this is corrugated cardboard. That's going to come in handy. Corrugated cardboard will take the shape of whatever you press it onto, and the outline of that shape will be there, okay? So once you get your knuckle assembly here, what you would do is you would take this cardboard and you would place it on top of, exactly on top of where you wanted it to go, and press it down, okay? Now again, I'm not able to do this because this is installed, but I'm gonna do it over here just to kind of show you the way this works, okay? So let's say, for example, that this location, okay, is over here, and I wanna make sure that I get this exactly right. So I'm gonna take my cardboard and I'm gonna press it right down into, and I'm pressing really pretty hard. See how it's kind of taking the shape here? Let me show you the other side in just a second. Okay, so once you've got it kind of pressed in there, and again, you do this over here, you flip it, and lo and behold, look at that, you got a shape. So you can then mark, and I do recommend you use, you know, something like a Sharpie for this. You can then mark your shape very accurately, okay? So you've got a shape roughly like this, and I'm just going by the lines that this just created for me, okay? So if I were gonna build a reinforcer for this particular area, I could cut this out, okay? And it would match exactly that area right there, okay? I know it's kind of hard to see, but. So let me cut this out. Cardboard took on this shape. So if I were gonna place, if this were my HDPE backer, right? I could then place this down right here, and look at that. Perfect shape of that particular area. Now obviously, you know, you'd want it to be longer, and you kind of want to position it the right way. But now I can take this directly over to my let's pretend that this box is our HDPE backer. I could take that, trace that right on the HDPE backer, and then use my jigsaw to then go ahead and cut this out. Okay, everybody see how that works? So we're using this cardboard, if you will, as a template, and we're, you know, pressing it in here to get an outline, and the cardboard then is going to take on the shape. I don't know if you can see that there. It's going to take on the shape that you want it to take on, and it's going to be exactly the right shape. When we turn it over, it's going to be exactly the shape that we want it to be. Okay. Four, and there's only 3 of these. I don't know where I put the other one. 4 1/4 inch 20 by 2, and I just chose to use stainless steel. These are basically the same, the slightly different size version of this bolt. This bolt's I think a 5/16, a little bit thicker. It's a little bit less long. I don't know that it's 2 inches long. It might be though. But the reason that you want this to be slightly more narrow is that eventually you're gonna fish these down into you're gonna thread these up through your HDPE, your stainless steel backing plate, up through your HDPE backer. You're then gonna tie your braid onto the top here, and you're gonna fish this whole assembly through the back hatch, down under here, and up through these holes that you've drilled. Bloop. Okay, and then you're gonna put wing nuts on there and hold it, and that way you can then bring your knuckle back over and start the assembly process, and I'll show you that just a little bit. Okay, so back to the install. You'll recall that we fabricated these HDPE stiffeners, which come with the Groovy Landing Gear kit. And we fabricated those by holding them on the top here, and I'll explain what these two are in a minute. Holding them on the top here, and fabricating something that goes down here and wraps around the rod holder. So, give you a sense of that. This assembly would sit right here, roughly this way. Okay. The question is, how do you get the stiffener and the backing plate? I think you can see the backing plate. That's hard to see. You see the backing plate underneath there? How do you get the backing plate in through that process? And I'll show you that right now. Fish through. And here's what the setup looks like for the other side. I chose to use braid. This is a 30-pound braid because it's thin and it pulls right through these holes real easily. I chose to use a green and a yellow, and then that way, corresponding, of course, is the green is tied off here and the yellow is tied off here. So what I'll do is pick this up, and the backing plate, of course, is underneath. I'll carefully place this up and underneath as far as I can reach, and I'll take these two strings and pull up, and that should wiggle it around a little bit, get it. The important thing is 2 steering cables run from here, and they kind of run this way down the boat. So when you go in, you've got to go in towards the gunnel of the boat. So when you go with this one, you go towards the gunnel of the boat, bypass those cables down this way and come up, and the same with this one. You go down, bypass the cables and come up. And that's kind of what we have here. So I'll show you the result in just a second. So quick look here is what happens if you thread through those 2 cables. Well, it's going to hang up. You're getting the backing plate through. So see how it's hung up there. There's no hope that's ever getting through that gap. So just be careful not to thread down through those cables. So now we've threaded our screws through the backing plate for our HDPE. I wanted to kind of give you a sense of what it looks like. So the way to do that is to put your phone up through the back hatch and just take a quick peek, and that's what it should look like. The bolts are through, everything's flush against the bottom of the boat. This looks good. Okay, so we've got these fished through. We've got these fished through. So now what we're going to do is we're going to bring the knuckle and crossbar over. We're going to hold them up, and one at a time we're going to take these wing nuts off, tap the bolt through. This being tight is holding the backing plate and the stiffener against the bottom here of the kayak. So we should be able to just tap these bolts out, drop the new bolts in, tighten them up, do the other side, and kind of go trade back and forth until we've got a good tight install. So let's get started. And see, we've dropped that bolt out, and now we can take the regular bolt, drop it right in, and tighten it down. Okay, so we've got the first side installed now. The trick is, and we have not tightened these completely down yet. Notice a little gap there, and there's still a little gap here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna lift this up and put a little silicone underneath so that we have a seal. I'm also gonna replace these washers with lock nuts. But we're just gonna put the other side down first. It's important to kind of leave yourself a little wiggle room on this side to then do that side. And you'll notice I have my brackets offset a little bit so that I can set one and then set the other. So that's what we're gonna do. All right, final installation is complete. We got solid as a rock backing plate and reinforcer underneath. And we have a good installation here. So that's the installation of the Boonedox Groovy landing gear in the alternate location on the flat side of the Outback as opposed to the traditional location out here. And worked out well. Lessons learned. The holes in the boat make them a little bit bigger than you think are needed for these bolts. The manual says that. I ignored that. I ended up widening them. Make the holes in the reinforcer underneath, the white HDPE reinforcer, a little bit bigger. It'll make it a lot easier when you fish those bolts up through and you lock one side down, and it'll make it easier to just drop the other one right through, and then it'll make it easier to thread this guy right down into the backing plate on either side. That got a little bit tricky, but it was a matter of patience more than anything else. And again, I did it from the back hatch here. You can't necessarily, at least I can't, maybe some can. I can't reach that with my arm. So there's a lot of sort of blind work happening in here, but that's just kind of the way it goes. But anyway, Boonedox Landing Gear installed. I think that's really solidly reinforced. We got stainless steel backing plate underneath. HDPE goes, comes down this way and wraps around, goes up to here, and kind of sits right underneath that way. And same on the other side. So I think this is pretty solid, and I did put a little marine sealant underneath here, just for safety's sake. So there you go, Boonedox Groovy landing gear installed. Good luck. Any questions? Send a comment down below.